Hi everyone, it's John from RFM Calc, and today I'm talking about our new e-commerce revenue forecasting reports. So this is a new service that we've introduced at the start of 2024. If I scroll down to our plan selection here on the RFM Calc homepage, you can see it's included. There we are, Advanced AI Revenue Forecasting in our medium, large and huge plans. So like all the new features we bring in for RFM Calc, there's no additional cost to add this. If you're on one of these plans already, you get this straight away, which is fantastic. So I think the reason we're really keen to bring this in is because a lot of e-commerce businesses, really every e-commerce business of any size, at some point you need to forecast future revenue to make decisions. And whether you work for an agency managing multiple clients or whether you work in-house for an e-commerce business, depending on where your role sits, you will at some point be asked to predict the future, which is difficult. But it's obviously very important to understand revenue growth and what revenue will look like in future years in order to make business decisions around that. So that's where this really comes in. It really comes in and it's really born out of our experience of needing to do this. Now, forecasting isn't easy. It's very difficult to do accurately. Obviously, no one can predict future world events. But what we can do is take your past revenue performance and using, as we'll show here, a combination of AI and machine learning, we can use your past performance to forecast future revenue. And we'll do that month by month, and we'll do it for up to 10 years. So I'll show shortly how you can kind of set this up. It's really, really easy to set it up on a project by project basis. And you can select basically how much revenue in terms of time you want to forecast in the future. And that can be anything from 2 to 10 years. So yeah, I think the easiest way to kind of demonstrate this is to just show it in action. So let's have a look at a few examples. Okay, so enabling the AI advanced revenue forecasting is really, really easy. You can do it from any project. So if you go to a project in your account, so this is our test Shopify project here in our test account. It's just under this option here, forecasting options. So there's basically three very simple options to enable this. So the first one is the number of years you'd like to forecast for. So by default, this is switched to no forecasting. But you can select anything up to 10 years, between 2 and 10 years, in terms of the number of years you'd like to forecast. So obviously, if you're doing a 10-year forecast, that's great, but a lot can change in 10 years, so we're not guaranteeing any accuracy here. But what it gives you is a really solid idea in terms of revenue growth based on your previous revenue performance. Now, to generate a forecast, you need to upload at least 18 months of data. We won't generate a forecast if you upload less than 18 months. And also, there needs to be revenue for at least 1 month of the year for every month. So if you upload 18 months, that can't be 18 Januaries in consecutive years. It needs to be obviously at least 12 months of actual data. So January, February, March, all the way up to December. It needs at least revenue data for those months, and then there needs to be another 6 months on top of that. But as we put here, ideally you'll have much more. Obviously, it's not going to be super accurate if you're only uploading 18 months. Obviously, some e-commerce sites who use RFM Calc don't have a huge amount of data, so we wanted to cater for those. But ideally, you'd have at least kind of 2, 3, 4 years worth of data to allow us to accurately forecast the future. So the other thing to note is that we'll may add some additional months as well. So even if you select 10 years, there may be a few extra months because we like to run January to December. So if your 10 years finishes partway through the year, say in June, we'll actually forecast the extra months to take you up to December. And that's mainly so the charts are nice and neat on the report. So you may get a little bit beyond the time you select, and that's deliberate, but roughly it's 2 to 10 years is the time you can select. But the key thing here is that if you don't upload 18 months of data, we won't physically add the section into your report. It'll just be excluded. The next option then is the forecasting engine. So there's a couple of options here. You don't really need to worry too much about these, but there's a little bit of help here. So the key machine learning aspect is based on linear regression, and there's a bit more behind it. So we use multiple models in terms of the forecasting, but there's basically two options here. So our default engine is suitable for most use cases, and that's what we'd recommend, and it accounts for seasonality. The modified multiple linear regression engine will typically produce a more even spread of revenue, i.e. less seasonal across future forecast years. So If you run the forecast and it's looking very, very spiky because you're a very seasonal business, but you'd actually like to see a more even spread, then you can select the modified engine. Ultimately, look, this varies on a huge number of factors, and it's a case-by-case basis. So, the great thing about RFM Calc is that you can run the report, and if you'd like to see a different version, you can run it again. Obviously, under the same monthly cost, we don't operate deliberately a credit-based system. You can run as many reports as you want during your monthly period. So, by all means, have a go with the default engine. And if you'd like to see an alternative forecast with the modified engine, then you can come back to your project settings, change that, run the report again really easily. That's no problem. And I'll demonstrate shortly a couple of variations of that with some example reports as well. And then the final option here is the forecast percentage alteration. So basically, how our forecasting works is it'll look at your past revenue performance and just forecast based on that. However, what we wanted to do is include an option if you want to tweak that performance based on a yearly percentage increase or decrease. So what you can do here is you can specify any value from -90 up to 500. We'll apply that percentage shift each year to your forecast revenue figures. So if you generate, let's say, a forecast for next year based on this default 0, so just based on past performance, you're growing now, you want to see what that growth looks like, that's great. But then maybe you want to say, actually, we want to push an extra 10%. So you'd enter 10 here, save your project options, and we will add an extra 10% each year to your revenue performance based on your initial forecast. So this allows you a lot of flexibility really to tweak the numbers that are coming out of the forecasting engine. So again, it feeds into the AI and the machine learning aspect, but will increase each year. So basically you'll get a 5% increase, let's say, or here a 10% increase in year 1 if you select 10%. But then that will be fed then into the algorithm for year 2. So you'll get that initial 10%, but then you'll get another 10% added on year 2. So it's kind of that nice curved growth that you normally expect in e-commerce. So we'll build that up incrementally for as many years as you've selected to forecast. So obviously there's a lot of maths and complication behind that I'm not going to go into too much detail on this video in terms of how we actually calculate it. But basically it's one of those where if you want to see additional growth or additional decline, like I say, you can add negative values here as well. No problem that the system will work with that. Then you can put that here rather than having to take our forecast and do manipulation afterwards at your end with spreadsheets and so on. You can add an increment here, positive or negative, to see how that looks in the forecasting engine, which is really, really useful as well, just allowing you to kind of tailor what you're reporting on and that predicted growth. Great, so let's look at some real-world examples. So the first one is a Magento site, which we've taken a big chunk of data for from May 2015 to June 2023. So it's a reasonable size site, not a huge site, but 275,000 orders in that time, around 22 million in revenue. So like all reports on RFM Calc, the revenue forecasting is completely platform agnostic. You can upload data from literally any e-commerce platform in the world. That's what kind of makes RFM Calc unique. So I'm going to demonstrate with Magento and Shopify and a bespoke platform as well, just to give you an idea. But the important thing to remember is obviously this is not unique to Magento or Shopify. You can use literally any e-commerce platform, bespoke, well-known, not well-known, and upload your data to RFM Calc, which is really what makes RFM Calc unique. So you can see, it's a well-established site. So if we just jump down to the forecasting section here, so we'll highlight here in terms of how many years you've selected to forecast for, just so when you're referring back to the report in future, you can say, okay, when I ran this report, I was forecasting for 6 years in the project settings. The first thing we'll do is an AI revenue analysis. So we pass your revenue data to our AI engine. So I think the important thing to note here is that we don't pass any personally identifiable information. So there's no customer info, but there's no info about your actual site as well in terms of your website URL or brand name or anything like that. We're just passing the revenue data, the AOV data and so on in the right format for the AI engine to interpret that and provide some useful information. So you can see for this e-commerce store, the AI has reported that it shows a clear pattern of seasonal fluctuations in terms of total revenue orders and average order value, and the total revenue orders and AOV tend to peak in the months leading up to the holiday season, particularly November and December, before declining in the early months of the following year and gradually picking up again, which is a pretty standard kind of e-commerce retail pattern, but it's useful to kind of summarize that in an AI predictive method. And as I say, you can run this for literally any e-commerce platform, any e-commerce site, and get that analysis as part of this report, which is great. We'll then forecast month by month in terms of the revenue and orders, so that's nicely charted there. And we'll do a nice table here, so you can see this goes all the way up to December 2029 in terms of revenue, orders and AOV, and you can see, look, the AOV fluctuates month by month as well. So we very much treat with the default engine your e-commerce business is seasonal, because most e-commerce businesses are. So AOV is not going to be standard across the year, as neither is revenue. So basically, you've got a big table here. You can copy and paste this straight into Excel as well, because it's a nice HTML table. And you can see we've included some actual revenue as well, where applicable, to kind of keep the charts nice and neat. So if I go back up to the charts here, you can see if I go back to the first kind of slide on this revenue chart, you can see we've got the actual revenue in there as well for those first few months, just to kind of show you how it compares and keep the chart nice and neat. So we're running January to December on every chart. And then if I scroll down, we'll do a yearly summary as well, which is really useful to be able to see. So we've got 2023 here, which included some actual revenue, and you can see the growth there, nice and steady. Based on previous revenue performance before 2023, we've forecasted the future growth, and you can see the revenue increases here, the AOV creeps up as well, and then based on that we can calculate the orders as well. So you get a nice kind of yearly snapshot. Okay, in 2029 for this site, we expect to be hitting 4.1 million in terms of turnover, based on current revenue growth, which is actually really useful to see. And the fact you can just upload your order file and RFM Calc does everything for you in terms of working this out is a massive time saver, we find. And the people who've been kind of testing this for us have found that as well, because like I say, forecasting is really important. It's normally quite a time consuming job to do this, but with RFM Calc, you can just upload and we'll generate a very, accurate forecast, we hope, but kind of comprehensive, and a forecast that makes sense, that you can pass on to your clients or other people in the business, and it makes logical sense. It's a well-founded forecast. And then what we'll also do, which is an added bonus, is we'll forecast new versus returning customer revenue as well. So as well as the revenue forecast, the AOV forecast, we'll also look at your new versus returning customer rate. And you can see here we forecast revenue. So this is the yearly overall, which matches the above. But then we've also split by new versus returning customers. And you can see here basically the percentage changes. So what's happening here from 2023 is you're getting more returning customers, which is again very standard in e-commerce, but it's nice to be able to see that by 2029, we'll actually have a bigger percentage. 79% nearly will be from returning customers, only 21% will be from new customers. And that's pretty standard again in e-commerce, that over time your returning customer rate increases. So it's nice to be able to forecast that, and that's obviously really important to know, as you'll know if you've looked at our new versus returning customer reports and you've seen the videos we've done on that, because obviously returning customers cost a lot less to bring back to your site than it does that it will cost to acquire new customers. So obviously being aware of that mix and understanding how that will change going forwards is obviously really, really important as well. Now look, like all things, this is very, very difficult to forecast. You could go out and spend a huge amount of money in one of these years on acquiring new customers instead. We can't predict that, but we're predicting based on your current performance where we think the new versus returning customer split will fall. Okay, so one other thing I wanted to demonstrate with this site as well. So you can see we've got the forecast revenue by year here. We've run basically the same report for this particular site, but for this revenue forecast, we've applied a 15% yearly adjustment. So you can see that's reported there. So when you refer back to this, you can see, okay, when I did my project settings and ran this report, we had a 15% yearly forecast percentage alteration here. But I just wanted to demonstrate how that affects the figures. And the easiest way to see that is to look at the forecast by year. So you can see, if I just scroll down here, there's a distinct difference. So based on the normal previous performance and projected growth based on that, you can see by 2029 we're hitting 4.1 million, but with the 15% increment that's applied every year, for every year you include in your forecast, we're actually hitting 6.6, nearly 6.7 in 2029. So that's really useful, because when you're doing forecasting, it's great to know where you'll be if you carry on on your current trend with your current performance levels, but it's also great to know actually if we're able to increase by 15% each year, we'll actually hit 6.7 by 2029. So that's really useful to know. And one of the key things you'll notice here is that the main growth is coming from the number of orders. Obviously, we're not increasing AOV by the same amount because that doesn't happen in e-commerce. If you're increasing revenue by 15%, it's highly unlikely that your AOV is going to be the primary driver behind that. The primary driver is far more likely to be an increase in traffic and therefore an increase in orders. So obviously AOV does go up because that's logical that AOV won't stay the same if you're achieving that growth, but the primary driver is the number of orders you're receiving rather than just the AOV, and that's really, really important. And I think a lot of forecasting engines would get that wrong due to a lack of understanding of how e-commerce works, but obviously that's our expertise and that's why RFM Calc is so good. Because we have all that e-commerce experience to know typically where that growth will come from if you're driving that growth. So that's really, really useful to be able to see that. And like I say, you can apply literally any number you want here from minus 90 up to 500. So obviously if you do 500%, the numbers will get very silly here. But you've got that option there, that flexibility to add a percentage increment to your forecast and see how that looks. And like I say, you can come back and you can run it, you can change the increment, you can run it again. There's no limit to the number of reports you can generate with RFM Calc, so you can just try different combinations and see what looks right, see what you'd like to go for and what fits. And that's really where the power of RFM Calc comes in to allow you to make those changes. Run the report again. It's the same monthly cost. There's no credit-based system deliberately to allow you to do that. And that gives you a lot of flexibility then to tweak these figures, like I say, without having to take the figures out, export them into Excel, change them yourself afterwards. You can add that increment as part of the process here, and we'll do all that for you. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to demonstrate was just how the new versus returning is calculated. So we've got a high repeat customer website here. So this site's done nearly 80 million in revenue. From October 2018 to December 2022, but from a small number of customers versus the number of orders. And that's because this is a B2B site and they have a very high returning customer percentage. As we can see here on the new versus returning report, it's a very small amount of revenue is coming from new customers. So naturally, when you go down to forecasting, again, we've got the AI analysis. We've got the forecast revenue by months. Which works really, really well. So that's, nice and clear there in terms of their revenue growth from 2023 onwards. But what you'll see here is that obviously that feeds into the new versus returning customers. So given that the percentage of returning customers is really, really high, obviously that's not going to change going forwards. As they grow, that returning customer percentage is still going to be massive, as you can see here. So it drops from 99.27% in 2023 to 99.01% in 2027 in this instance. But you can see there, we're obviously taking the data. We're not just randomly guessing at new versus returning customers. We're looking at your existing data and we're factoring that into the new versus returning forecast. Because obviously, like I say, the percentage is really, really high. That's unlikely to change as you grow for this particular site, although there is a small increase that we're forecasting in new customer growth. But the majority is going to come from returning customers. So again, it's really important to kind of factor that in. We're not going to go against your existing data. We're going to build that in very, very closely in terms of how your site works now in terms of that new versus returning customer split. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to demonstrate, and this is for another completely different site. So this is a more standard kind of retail site, quite small. November 2017 to November 2023, only 3.5 million in revenue. At a smaller number of customers. You can see the revenue very seasonal, quite spiky for this particular site, which is not unusual in retail. So if I go to the forecast here, you can see the forecast obviously as normal with our default engine will carry on with that kind of spiky view in terms of that high seasonality. Now, for various reasons, you might not want to see that in a forecast. You might want to see a more even spread of revenue. So still, overall for the year, you want an accurate picture. When we go down to here, but you'd actually, in terms of looking month by month, for various reasons, it can be better to see a smoother kind of overall picture here. So this is what we've done here for this. So this is the same data, the same website, but we've used the modified engine, and you can see the obviously after the first kind of year, the revenue then gets a lot smoother. So you've still got that slight increase in November and December is still higher because obviously it's very, very visible here that those months are higher. But the rest of the year is very much smoothed out. which can be useful when you're forecasting to kind of not have those very seasonal spikes when you're trying to predict future revenue and predict future ordering and buying and so on, and stock management. It can sometimes be useful to look at it in a more smoother month-by-month basis. So if we look at the overall revenue, it's very, very similar for both methods with both engines. So there's a slight difference. You can see it goes from 5.3 to kind of 5.5, just about in terms of the predicted revenue across the next 4 years, or 3 and a bit years. This was a 3-year forecast, but it's the month-by-month breakdown that's really smoother with the modified engine, with the multiple linear regression engine that I mentioned previously. So that's just a nice example. Like I say, for most sites, the default engine is the one we'd recommend, and that will give you an accurate kind of seasonal picture going forwards, which is normally what you want. But we know from experience there can, like I say, be sometimes instances where you'd like to see a smoother kind of progression over the month in terms of revenue growth. And that's why we have that second engine option there to allow you to do that. So next, I just wanted to demonstrate a Shopify forecast, only because Shopify is obviously a hugely popular platform. As I say, RFM Calc can accept data from any platform. It's completely platform agnostic, but just to show it works for Shopify, we've done a quick Shopify example here. So this is a 5-year forecast. As you can see, you've got a nice AI analysis again of the past revenue. It's noticed there's a dip in revenue and orders in March 2020 due to COVID-19. So it's pulled out that kind of information as well. So it gives you a nice summary that you can pass on to your client, you can pass on to other people in the business in terms of that analysis of your previous performance. And it's really nice to be able to have that and be able to do that for any site, rather than you having to kind of look through the data manually and summarize issues. Obviously, AI is great at doing that. We've then got the revenue, and you can see it's quite spiky again, but you can see forecast month by month, no problem in terms of the AOV, and you can see the revenue increases steadily year on year as well for this particular site. So 20 million in 2022 up to 43 million, in 2027, based on our forecast. So you can see this is a Shopify site, but just like the other sites, absolutely no issue at all generating this data, and you get a really solid kind of forecast off the back of that. As you'd expect. Interestingly, the AOV on this one doesn't continually go up. So again, we forecast a bit of an AOV drop here as the revenue increases, but more orders being driven. And again, that's what the engines kind of come up with. But as I say, this is mainly to demonstrate that this works perfectly well with Shopify, as you'd expect, as it works for any other e-commerce platform. Okay, and lastly, just to show that RFM Calc can work with completely bespoke platforms and large data sets, we've done a forecast here for a large bespoke site. So this is nearly 3 million order rows, 1.7 million customers, over 100 million in terms of revenue over a prolonged period. But that's absolutely no problem for RFM Calc. We can handle large data sets without any issue at all, and that includes forecasting. So you can see we've got the nice AI revenue analysis again over the period. So it's over a period of 5 years, but it's picked out some key events there in terms of declines, anomalies, which is really, really interesting again when you're looking at the data. Again, this business is quite seasonal, where the end of the year is very busy, but March in particular shows a big drop. And again, you've got the month-by-month breakdown. You've got the year-by-year breakdown as well for every year. So this particular site will go from $30 million to 48 in 2028 based on the current trend. Again, you can go back and apply a percentage increment in your project settings if you want to, as I've demonstrated previously. And you can see here the AOV kind of steadily increases for this particular site as well. And then we've got the new versus returning customer breakdown. And this particular site is actually showing a trend of more new customers coming in at the time of the forecast. So that's reflected in the new versus returning customer breakdown as well. But as you can see, the forecast works perfectly well. It's perfectly kind of comprehensible in terms of how it works out the data and how it explains it and how we do the AI analysis. So you can see absolutely no issue at all doing it for a large data set of nearly 3 million orders. No problem whatsoever. Fantastic. So I think that's pretty much everything. So hopefully that's been useful in terms of explaining how our forecasting engine works. As I say, it's based on a combination of AI, which has obviously become much more prevalent in the last couple of years, and machine learning as well. No one can predict the future, so that's a little caveat we have to throw in there. So obviously things can change, but this should give you a really solid basis in terms of predicting future revenue in a logical and easy to understand way that you can then pass to your clients, to board members in your business, and to give you that forecast for revenue going forwards. And like I say, because of the options we've kept it quite simple, but there are some really cool options in the project settings as well to allow you just to kind of tweak the yearly forecast percentage increments as well. So you can add that in there as well and build in different variations of forecasting models and different variations of predicted revenue really easily by running the report multiple times with different options. And obviously you can forecast more years, less years. There's a lot of flexibility there, considering we've kept it really simple with a number of options as well. And as I say, this is included. If you've got a medium plan or above, you've got access to this straight away. You can go away and start forecasting revenue now for your e-commerce store. Fantastic. So I hope that's been useful. Thanks for watching. Obviously, if you have any questions, feel free to drop us a line, and happy forecasting. Thanks, everyone.